So we are creating an Express.js application and we are building multiple APIs in that Express.js application. Now the question is, what are the best practices we have to follow while building these APIs? So there are certain rules we should follow so that we create APIs which are much compatible with other developers' applications. So in this video, we are going to discuss theory behind the best practices of creating an APIs. And you should watch this video because to become a good developer, you should follow the best practices of creating an APIs. So watch till the end and get all the pointers which you will be requiring to build a good API in Express.js application. Hey everyone, this is Kamran and I'm a full stack web developer. In this series of video, I am teaching how you can build web applications using Express.js framework. So now let's talk about all the best practices we should follow while creating an API step by step. Now, if you are new here, I would suggest you to hit the subscribe button so you will get all the good web development videos on your feed. So now let's talk about what are the best practices we should follow while naming an API. Why this is important? Because while naming an API, it should follow certain rules so that it should be compatible with all other applications, because these APIs could be used by your own application or it will be used by some other application. So we should follow some standards to while naming the API so that other applications can smoothly connect with our APIs. Now let's talk about the pointers which we have to keep in mind while naming the APIs. The first pointer which we have to keep in mind is not about the naming, it's all about the format, how we should always return and get the data in the API. So mostly in the web application, we should use the JSON format. So for those who don't know, JSON format is a JavaScript object notation. So this is a simple object which we use in JavaScript, and while you create any API, you should always receive or send data in the JSON format, so that it will be a standard between you and the party which will be connecting to your API. The second important point which you have to keep in mind while naming an API is you should always use a noun instead of verbs. So let's say if you want to create an API in which you are going to add a category in your application. In our example, which the application which we are building, then in that we are going to create an API which will be creating some category or creating some subcategory. So in that we should not name our endpoints as create post. Instead of that, we can just simply use the noun. So we are not going to name our endpoints such as create category. Instead of that, we are just simply going to append category in the endpoint. So that will denote the name noun instead of verb. So that is the one good practices while naming a API. Now the third point. So the third point is always name the collections with the plural name. So in our application, we are going to create a collection. We are going to work with a category of a product, right? So that product category collection should always be a plural. So it should be categories instead of category. So that is the third point which you have to keep in mind. Now we will talk about the fourth point. So now we have talked about how we should name our APIs. Now the fourth point is all about how we should pass the status of the API. So when we make an API call, we are going to get some response, and with response we should add some status code. So these status codes will help you to differentiate between the API's response at the first. So let's say you have some information in your response, so then you are going to use the status code between 100 to 199. And if you have something to tell about the redirect, then you have to use the 300 to 39, and respectively you have some different code ranges. In that also, like, you have some particular code status code for each of the type of response. So I'm not going to talk about in detail of this status code. You can get the list of all the status code used in the HTTP and you can use them accordingly. So these status code will help you to get the status or get the what kind of response are we getting from this API at the first go at itself. So now comes the fifth point, where you have to show the relationship between the endpoints as well. Okay, so now in our application, let's say if you want to get a status of an order, we are not going to create a single endpoint with a single name order status. Instead of that, what we are going to do, we are going to do some nesting. So we are going to say we have /order and /status. That will help us to understand the actual purpose of that API. and also that will help us to make a collection of APIs. So you can keep all the order APIs in a single bucket, and then you can differentiate inside that. So you can use order create, order status, and order cancel, those APIs inside the order collection. And how do we create a collection, and inside that how do we create multiple APIs, that we are going to look into the upcoming videos. Now we will talk about the fifth and very important point in this best practices. We are going to use get APIs a lot, where we are going to get the list of certain things, like list of categories, list of subcategories, list of products, right? So in that case, we are not going to get all the data at once and do the filtering, sorting, pagination on the front end side. Instead of that, the best practice is that you do all these things on the server side. And what is the benefit of that? Because server is going to be a much larger machine, and you don't know about the client side, like who are going to use what kind of machine for their local. So in that case, all the complex things you can do on the server side, use like filtering, sorting, pagination on the server side, instead of doing that in the client side. So you have to pass that what kind of filter you are applying to the API from the front end, and then you can get the data from the backend on that. And there are few other points which we have to discuss. We have to keep the security in mind. So seventh point is all about security. So you should use SSL, which is the security level which should be applied to the APIs. So instead of using HTTP request, you have to use the HTTPS secured requests. So it will help you to encode all your requests, that will secure all your data and the personal information of an API. So the eighth point in this list will be versioning. So you have to make versions of your APIs. What is the use of this version? So let's say you started working on an application. Now you are creating each and every APIs. Now after some time, the whole code base changes, and you have to now use the whole new set of the APIs, right? So you are not going to create a new project, and inside that you are going to create these whole new set of APIs. Instead of that, what you can use is versioning. So you can version your APIs. So start with the version 1, and then you can use these versions to create a different set of APIs. So that will help you to maintain all the codes in one place, for even if you are maintaining two different versions of an application. Now we are going to talk about the final and the ninth pointer, which is very important for any API development. That is API documentation. So the API documentation is very important. Like it is as important as creating an API, and we have to document each and everything, because whenever you are going to add a developer in your development cycle, then you have to give all the information to that new developer and all the good practices you are already following in your development. So you have to create a good API documentation. And the API documentation is also very important, because when you are going to share your APIs with someone, you can just simply pass on that API documentation. That will help them to understand what are the APIs you have created in your project and how to use them, what are the security levels you have added, and how you are handling the errors and everything. So if you are planning to create any new project, so you have to follow these 9 pointers of best practices while creating an API. I hope this video will help you to create a great application. And from the next video, when we are going to create actual APIs, so we are going to keep these 9 pointers always in mind. Thanks for watching the video, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel, hit the red button down there, and happy coding everyone. See you in the next video.